Do you guys want to hear a joke? Okay. I'm glad that you said yes. So there was this general, and he was going into battle. And every time he went into battle, he would say, "Give me my red shirts." And so his men would bring him the red shirt, he'd put on the red shirt and ride into battle. And they never questioned why he's getting the red shirt every time. And then one day, this soldier goes, "Sir, every time we go into battle, you say, 'Bring me my red shirt.' Is it to inspire us so we can see you out ahead of us?" And he's like, "No, it's because if I get shot, I don't want you to see the blood." So one day, they're going into battle. And he goes, "Oh, look over there, you guys. Look at that danger that we're about to head into. Bring me my brown pants." Okay. I was like, "Bring me my brown marker." It just popped in. I taught middle school for a life.
I know, right?
But I love that joke because you can actually tell it in middle school.
You could probably even tell it in the target language, you know.
If they know their colors and their, clothing items.
They'll remember it.
Mon pantalon marron. All right, so I'm just gonna talk to you guys a little bit about how to scaffold up the reading tasks and even the listening tasks too. So I'm just gonna start with first year down here for reading and listening, and also this would be for me. I really want my kids to feel confident, and so this would be for me also at the very beginning of a second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year class. So first thing that I'm going to do so this is reading and this is listening. So for reading, I'm going to bring them basically a write and discuss, like verbatim. So even if we do these tiny little write and discusses, their reading assessment is literally going to be 1, 2, 3. So they might be about 3 different topics because they're going to be short, but I want it to be literally every word that we wrote and nothing really else. So that does mean I have to make up a different little story for every class. I have to make a different sheet for every class. But I don't mind doing it because it's already written. All I have to do is type it up. And if you're typing on Google Classroom, some teachers do the write and discuss. And Phoebe, we were talking about Diane Neubauer with Chinese. Phoebe was like, "Man, making all those characters in front of my kids is going to take forever." But Diane Neubauer does live typing. Because, with Chinese, it'll start filling in. I guess once it knows what you're trying to say, it'll fill in the characters for you. And then, so if you're teaching an upper level class, I would just advise you to just go quickly up this, as quickly as your kids can go, up this ladder, but to kind of take them through these steps, because a big part of learning a language is feeling confident that you can do it. And I don't want to hit them with something way up here when they just hit my class in third year French. And yesterday, Alex and Will, and you might have the same situation, they were talking about how they get these kids in second year and third year, and they come from different teachers. And some teachers do more reading, and some teachers do more grammar and translation, or not really even translation, probably, but grammar and memorizing things, and the kids don't hear and read a lot. And so if you've got a class like that, you could start them all, even if they're an upper level class, they could all start back down here at the bottom so that the new kids to CI or to hearing the language will be able to get confident too. I've literally never had a kid, even kids with IEPs and reading disabilities, not be able to do this. Even after 5 weeks in the first assessment that we do. And my kids were 12 and 13 and 14. Because this is such a accessible, easy, achievable reading thing, we've done it together, we've talked about it together, we've done all these reading things together with it, and we maybe reviewed it again in the reading workshop part of class. So I feel really strongly about this because I have taught a lot of intervention classes for middle schoolers and high schoolers, and a lot of kids, they never are, a lot of our students are just never successful with literacy in any class. Probably starting in second grade, everything just got really hard. They say that there's this time, maybe you've heard this, where you're learning to read and then you're reading to learn. And that usually happens around second or third grade. And a lot of the students didn't really learn how to read all that great. And then everything switches into this reading to learn. They're reading about the solar system and Lewis and Clark and California Gold Rush and all this stuff, and they can't comprehend the text, and they just kind of get left behind. So I've seen kids who are like failing all their other classes get really proud of being able to do this reading in another language even. So I feel really strongly about this, even in the upper levels, to start there. And then, kind of the next level is to bring them like their own write and discuss, plus some new language. And if I was using an anchor chart system, I would bring, I'm just going to draw a little anchor. I would put into their language from that anchor chart, because that's going to be pretty easy for them. They've seen this language on the anchor chart. Maybe it wasn't in this particular piece of writing, so it's slightly new for them, but they are seeing language in a different context that they've already seen in class. And then the next level is to bring them a write and discuss from a different class. So like you would bring like third period, French 1 or French 3, bring their write and discuss to your fifth period French 3 class. And then I guess you can kind of think of like the little extra thing that you could do would be to do like the plus in that one too. So you might have kids, like I've taught in a couple different school populations, and I taught in a school population where the kids had really low literacy, just like in general. Not everybody, but in general there was a lot of struggling readers. And for that kind of population, I wouldn't like try to make it harder faster than they're going to be confident. But then I moved to the Harvard of Portland, and not actually Harvard, but our Harvard, this high school where almost everybody was reading at grade level. We had like 95% kids passing our Common Core SBAC test. Do you guys use SBAC? Park? SBAC. So it made probably exactly the same test. So we had like 95% of those kids passing this newer, harder test. So these kids had some generally pretty high literacy. So for those kids, like I needed to ramp up the complexity like faster. I was very surprised actually that they'd be like, well, I mean, Miss Hargaden, we just read we made these, it's too easy. And I was like, oh, okay, well I kept just having to push it up a little bit just to prove to them that they could do it. So it kind of depends on your class. Some classes, you're gonna need to keep them feeling like they're learning, like take them up this ladder quicker. And some kids, if you were to like move them up too quick, they'd like shut down and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I knew this class was gonna be hard. I thought it was easy, but now it just got really hard. So it just depends on kind of like the personality and the level of that class. So a lot of you guys, we don't have, in Oregon, we don't have the honors class and the not honors class, but you would think most likely in an honors class you'd be going up this ladder quicker. And then, so the next level would be to like write something new. So like to look at the anchor charts again, and like get language off the anchor charts, and then maybe to go on like YouTube or the internet, the IN, I'll call it. Just go on the good old IN and maybe find some ideas of things that you could bring to them, but like take that, look at the anchor chart, and like write something that you are pretty sure is going to be easy for them. So this is like you're kind of filtering the content for them and changing it to fit what they can handle. And you can actually take like content from the internet and make, run it through a couple different filters and come up with, a lower one and a higher one. So you could watch a video on the Louvre, right, and take some notes, and maybe find an article on the Louvre and like copy a few sentences or paragraphs. And then for your upper level classes, maybe you don't change it all that much. Maybe modify just a little bit. And then for your lower level classes, like take that reading that you made for your upper level classes and start taking things out. Here's some advice on how to do that. I was doing a training in Pennsylvania, I think, or Virginia, or New Jersey. I don't remember. It was like a month ago, and I was doing this training, and it was weird because I didn't know before I went to the training that it was going to be language arts teachers, social studies teachers, ESOL teachers, and language teachers. So it was like, whoa, okay. So I was like, what can I teach them that like it will apply to all of them? And I taught them what I'm about to teach you now, and the principal was sitting in the back, and she was like taking mad notes, and like, I'm going to teach this to the staff, like to everybody. because knowing how to modify a text is something that every teacher could really do. Because a lot, like I said, a lot of our kids, even really literate kids, we're giving them stuff that's above their level, even in like their native language. So this is, I think, some pretty valuable information. So here's a few tips on things to do. First tip is to like remove things. You could remove whole like paragraphs or passages. And when I'm looking to make a text more comprehensible, I would look for things that are more like abstract. Remember I said earlier that the ACTFL is basically asking them to interpret and produce longer discourse and more complex discourse about more abstract, complex topics. So like the more abstract a topic is, you're getting up into kind of like the advanced interpretation. So if it was like a thing about the Louvre, and they're talking about like how people, you know, at first they didn't like the pyramid, and why, and then they get into all this stuff about like, you know, all these philosophies about like architecture, then maybe take that out because it's kind of complex and abstract. I might just leave in, lots of people didn't approve, or lots of people didn't like the style of the pyramid, but now it's a national icon. So you can take out whole passages. Sometimes I'll take out just like a sentence, because maybe the sentence is just not really germane to the main subject of the topic of the article. Sometimes I'll take out like clauses, like from a sentence. Especially in French and Spanish, the sentences can, and Italian, the sentences can really go long and on and just, you know, a lot of clauses in there. So sometimes I'll take a clause out if it's just kind of adding in some extra cool information that doesn't really need to be there if you want to understand just the basic topic. Sometimes I'll take a sentence with like 2 or 3 different parts and break it up. So I'm not exactly deleting the clause, but I'm making like, I'll take like one sentence and make it into like 3 shorter sentences. I used to work in a translation company, and when we would get Chinese or Thai or any other language that wasn't French, Spanish, Italian, even German, you'd have the English here and you'd have the language here, and the language would be like, whoa, there's all this extra space, that's cool. And then we get Spanish. Sometimes we get French, not often, but we get Spanish. They'd be like, oh, the English like all fit nicely onto this page, but boy, I gotta take that font down because it's like all over the page now because Spanish is my fault. So probably why I like those languages, because I just love words. Stacking them up. Sometimes I'll take out like just a word and put in a word that they will know. So if it's some kind of really high level sort of, there's different tiers of vocabulary, even you've heard this in staff trainings. There's like level 1 vocabulary, level 2, level 3. So level 3 is like the very esoteric, abstract, super academic vocabulary that only is used in a certain context. And then level 2 is like kind of the fancy words that we would maybe say in conversation that are just that extra level of like being educated and having a large vocabulary. And then level 1 is things like house and car and floor and ceiling and, you know, just normal things that everybody would know, even if they're not really well educated. So sometimes I'll take the word out and replace, like, take out a level 3 or a level 2 word and kind of replace it with, I mean, I don't know if there's a list out there of like Spanish level 1, level 2, level 3, and French and Chinese, but anybody teach another language that's not Spanish, French, Chinese? Okay. There very well could be though, especially because there's so many immersion schools now. So maybe like a dual language program has made these, because a lot of schools actually really hammer this concept to the teachers. And it's usually like teach them the level 3 words, which is cool if you already have the level 1 words. But our kids don't have the level 1 words. That's why they're in like they're in like a world language program, so they still need those level 1 words. So if I see something that's too academic, sometimes I'll take it down. Sometimes I don't though. Sometimes I'll leave the word. This is like a level 2, level 3 word. I'll add this in. So I'll be like, onomatopoeia, which is when the word sounds like the sound. And so this is all, like after this, it's gonna be all like sort of as much sort of level 1 language as I can put in there. to explain what that was. If you're gonna do this, I would recommend not like keeping too many of those words in any one passage, unless your kids are super academic, or like in a really high level class and they already have a lot of these level 1 and even level 2 words. You don't wanna load them up where it's like every single sentence is like blah blah, comma, which is this, blah blah blah, which is that. It's like, it ends up being like a glossary page and not really a reading. So you might get rid of some of the words or even the clauses or sentences or passages that those words are in, and just maybe, it depends on your kids, but keep 2 to 5 to 6, 7, of these words in any passage. And the words that you keep in there, here's another way to make it easier for them. You can put a picture that like portrays that word. So, I don't know, maybe like pow, which is onomatopoeia, right? Like, I guess, pow, I don't know. And say like, down here, pow is onomatopoeia. So like having that word under a picture and also defined inside the text will help them to understand that word. And it's also good for them to see that word in multiple places because that's how our vocabulary is best remembered if we see the word in different contexts. Especially if you see it in different contexts now and then maybe a week later and then later and then later and you keep coming back to it and you see it over and over. So within this concept of like bringing them new stuff from like an outside source, there's sort of levels inside of there too. Because like level 1 would be, like I said, finding things that are like for first graders, and second graders, and third graders who are getting their education in the language. So you can find videos, you can find texts that were written like by people, educating kids in these languages. And a little tip, I think I said this yesterday, is to Google the topic and then put there either like primer grado or like CE2 or CE1, or you can put like para jóvenes, or like, for young people, for kids. And then, but usually I put that in quotes and that in separate quotes. That usually gives me the best results. And if I put that into like a regular Google search, then I can just go to Google video search and find videos. And if I'm having them, well that's for listening, but if I'm having them listen to a video, well I guess I'll talk about that later. So sometimes I'm actually taking the video that I'm gonna have them listen to, and I'm making this passage based on my notes off of that video. So it's like an integrated performance assessment basically. They're gonna listen to it and they're also gonna read this thing that I wrote based on my notes. And then of course, as you're scaffolding this up, I mean, it's probably pretty obvious how one would think you would scaffold that up, right? So this is, like really young kids, like way younger than your own kids. And then, you're getting more like just a little younger, depending on how old your kids are. So things that would be usually written for like 4th and 5th graders would be things like, there's this French one called, I think it's Wikidia. Is that French? Is that what it is? Wikidia? There's like a kid Wikipedia in French, and also that Reading A to Z. They have an app called Raz Kids, so Reading A to Z. You can look at their level text and find things that are kind of written for 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, 6th grade level. In the Reading A to Z, that would generally be like level L through, well, Z is like 8th grade, like grade level. They're pretty good, challenging readings actually. So, about here, I would say probably L through P or Q.
Is that just for French or?
The Reading A to Z actually has way more Spanish than it has French, but it does have French. And the Wikipedia is only for French, but these kind of websites exist in every language. Like, we got Kidpedia or something like that in English too. And this is like Un jour en actu. But Un jour en actu I think is a little higher up. So then you maybe bring them things that are like, almost on grade level. And you're thinking like, okay, if I was teaching in Quebec, And I was teaching, like, let's say your kids are generally in 9th and 10th grade. I'm teaching 8th grade in Quebec. What am I going to bring my kids to read? And so this is like the end of that reading A to Z. So the Q and above, like up to Z. Also, if you teach Spanish, there's News ELA. You maybe heard about that. You guys know News ELA? You can go into this News ELA, like English Language Arts is what it's for. And so because there's so many dual immersion programs with Spanish, it doesn't exist for French, sorry. Because there's so many dual language immersion programs that have Spanish, they've basically, it didn't used to have it, but they have Spanish now. And you can go in there and adjust the lexile level. So the lexile level is basically a readability level. It looks at how long the sentences are and how much of this like level 2 and 3 vocabulary is in there. That's basically, they run things through from, so it's news articles that were written in Spanish or English, and they run it through, and it's just a computer program, and it just spits out this level. And I believe lexiles go up to 1600, which is like high schoolers, like they're ready to go to college. And I think that News ELA might go down to 400 or 500, which is about 2nd grade, 1st grade level. But I'm telling you guys, like, my native speaking English students in 7th and 8th grade often had lexiles of 400 or 500 in their own language.
That thing's called what?
News ELA, but it's not in French.
I know, I was gonna
She's
share
reading.
right?
It's a great resource, actually. And then, this is like the goal, right? That they could read like sort of high school level and adult level text. So this is like literary passages. And I'm talking about being able to read on their own. It's not like they can't read these things with your support and with your help in class, but this is like for assessment, you know? I wouldn't give them Le Petit Prince. You know, I mean, I would read it with them. We're gonna do a little activity, like, in the lesson, we'll read part of Le Petit Prince, and you'll see that, like, you can actually scaffold them up to be able to almost independently kind of read it with a partner. But for an assessment, I would not bring them, like, Le Monde. I mean, or any kind of, like, adult level newspaper or anything like that.
Or like actual IB for AP.
Yeah, this is basically the level of AP and IB text. And, like, I know that the type of kid who generally goes into AP and IB can probably handle that level of text in their native language, but there are so many students in the building, in most populations, where they couldn't read that level of text in their own language. And honestly, I feel like if we don't start doing this kind of thing, like at the beginning of every year, and especially in the first couple of years, just never really getting above like this, like para jóvenes level, we're gonna continue to have programs that are like racially and economically very skewed towards white privileged people with more economic means, because that's generally, you know, what you'll see in a program like this. Like, not like a program like this, but in a language program, you'll generally see that like 1st and 2nd year kind of reflects the population of the school, and then as you go up, it's the more like already academically successful kids who are able to, you know, keep on going up. Yeah. Of course, that's different in schools that change their programs. Like Bob Patrick. You guys know Bob Patrick? He's awesome. He's a Latin teacher in Georgia, and he's been in his school a long time because I know his daughter Miriam actually works at the school with him now. So I don't know how long he's been at his current school, but when he came to his school, he was a 0.5 FTE Latin teacher because that's all they had. And so Bob goes into his school and he looks around at his Latin classes, and like the school was pretty diverse. It's in North Atlanta, and Atlanta's a pretty diverse place, like incredibly so these days actually. It's changed a lot since I was a kid. And he had all these kids in the school, but he never saw them. Like all he had in his class was like a bunch of white kids, and the school, and like, so it was like 90% white kids in his classroom, but like the school was not 90% white. It was like much less. And he was like, this just isn't right. And so he started changing his program and using more communication and, you know, interaction in Latin, and like not emphasizing the grammar and the memorizing things. And he's been there a long time, and now they have 5 Latin teachers. Wow. So they had 0.5, and now they have 5. And the Latin program is not just a bunch of white kids. It's probably still a little more white than the rest of the school, because I was talking to Justin about this last year. Apparently Latin kind of has this history of attracting white supremacy to the ranks of Latin teachers and students. It's sad but true. So I think maybe because of that, like the program might still be not quite as in line with the demographics of the school, but it's much more in line, like because they're scaffolding kids up and making them successful and making the program engaging. So it's not like it has to stay that way, where like the upper level classes are kind of like closing the door to kids. So this is very important to me because of that equity consideration. So then for listening, it's kind of the same thing here. And what I basically do for my assessments, and Lorena, I think you were kind of touching on this too earlier, it's basically like an integrated performance assessment. Does anybody not, it's okay, raise your hand. I know I'm asking you to say you don't know something, but it's okay. Does anybody not know what an integrated performance assessment is?
Okay, well.
Okay, yay, thanks for being honest. So sometimes they're called an IPA, which where I come from is like a tasty beverage. It's like the national drink of Oregon.
Oh yeah.
I think this stands for India Pale Ale. It's my favorite. My husband says I like beer that would like take the paint thinner off the car. It's like this really bitter beer. I think the reason we love it so much in Oregon is because we grow a lot of hops, and it's very hoppy, so it's like very bitter. And I think they're just trying to get us to enjoy it, so that we would buy our own products. You know, it's like you guys probably really like almonds, and we just love hoppy beer. You've probably been brainwashed by the state of California to just really love almonds and avocados.
And oranges. We love
And
oranges.
oh yeah, oranges and lemons. Yeah, man. You know, we don't even eat those things. I'm just kidding. So anyway, IPA is also a beer, so it's always kind of funny. It's like, let's bust out the IPAs, everybody. All right, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about an integrated performance assessment. So basically, the reason it's called integrated is because you're going to do listening, reading, writing, and speaking about one thing. So it's all integrated. And it's called performance because it's not going to ask them like, what is, and I know IB does this, but like, what is the adjective in this sentence? So it's performance with the language. So they're like using the language. And then it's an assessment because it's a test. So it's basically a test where you're using the language to listen and read and then write and speak about that topic.
Can I ask?
Mhm.
So as you talk about the steps, are you talking about like through the year or a day? That's like one lesson.
So, oh no, this is like through the year, or even almost like through their career. Because here, look, I'll just color code it a little bit more here. So in first year, generally, I would get my students to about right there, like by the end of the year. So like the first assessments that we do, they're all just going to be really easy, and then depending on how like strong my kids feel to me, I can start moving, you know, maybe one class moves up and one class kind of stays here. But it's okay because like you can't go here without going through all this. So rushing through the basics is why these kids get left behind. It's why like we have kids in high school who can't read. Because some teacher at some point was like, well, it's time for you to start reading grade level stuff. And they're like, but I can't read anything even if it's really easy. They probably didn't think that way because they were like 8 years old. But it's a little heartbreaking when you think about it to have these kids who like are just killing time in school looking at text that they can't understand and listening to videos that they don't understand, even in their native language. When we could, that's why the principal was like taking notes, right? When we could learn how to reach them where they are. Because that's really the only way to succeed with teaching literacy. You have to reach them where they're at and take them to the next level. They can't magically jump. Because the reason that they can't read is because they just haven't spent much time reading anyway. If you just sat them down with a whole bunch of books and they just found books that they loved and they just read them for years and years on end, like they would catch up. But they just don't do that. And some kids like hate books. Like it's like poison.
Yeah.
Like they don't even want to touch it. Like, it burns. So having taught so many intervention classes and having taught language arts and social studies for so long in a school that was like 78% free or reduced lunch, and you know, like poverty and literacy kind of tend to correlate. So I am really just feel very strong about this. So first year, that's about where I guess my typical kids would get. Like even my, super wealthy, like super literate kids, like that's about where we got. And I was pretty happy with that because if they can like interpret something new, that even if I've modified it, and they're able to get out the main ideas and all the details, they're still performing at like an intermediate high level, and I think that's pretty darn good. So then, like for second year, I would still start here, but I would like go through that pretty fast, right? And then this is kind of where we'd like start off. Maybe we're gonna get here, maybe we're gonna get there. And so then, like for the upper levels, you're just getting up there quicker. And by the time you get to AP and IB, it's like, and then we're gonna spend the rest of the year pretty much up here after I've kind of built you guys up and you feel good. So maybe this is like week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, and then the rest of the year we're just marinating up here in the ether of academic language.
Tina, I think for those of us who have either 2 levels in one class, or as we've already talked about, we have so many different levels of kids, and I know for my program, they just move forward, they all pass. I mean, they pretty much all pass, and I move them forward. But by the time they're in level 2, they're really like there's really a huge. And if this is like brilliant because if you are working in a similar theme for like all your classes at that time, if you
like if you're doing like description, and you're describing places,
right? If you've got that kid in your level 2 class who's really strong, you could even use what you've already prepared for your level 3. Like to differentiate what the text they're reading, because they would love that. Or so you can, if you're in the same theme and you've got these things prepared for your different levels, you can kind of use those doubly, and it helps because I think for all of us it's it's the preparing for all the different classes and doing all that thing, but that puts it all just so like well organized and together and able to use something else for another like little group of kids, or if you have the double levels in that class, and yet you're not having to do so much extra work, and it makes sense.
Yeah, if every class is studying locations and you all talked about the Louvre, and in first year it was pretty simple, and in 4th, 5th year it was pretty complex. And then you take one thing and you're like modifying it up and down. Like once you get here, this is kind of I guess what Karen's talking about, right? Like this is all kind of like I take the same thing and I'm modifying it up and down, and so I've got these various levels that I've made. And what I used to do in social studies, so when I went to social studies teacher school, my teacher, Jeff Edmondson, taught me something that changed my life, really. Because I never would have thought of this on my own. I went to private school and I didn't know anybody except my best friend who had dyslexia, who couldn't really read my whole life. So I went to public school and I was like, oh, okay, some people can't read. They're like this tall and they still can't read. That's something I've really never seen before. And I also made the mistake of student teaching at this magnet program for the gifted and at Lincoln High School. So I kind of was in the sheltered world until I arrived at Gordon Russell, and then I was like, whoa, okay, this is okay, I got my work cut out for me. But because Jeff had told me this, I was very lucky. He told me, and the whole class, that the grade level text is generally way too hard for almost every grade level. So the 3rd grade level text for this is social studies, right? He's like, 3rd grade social studies text is too hard for probably 90% of most kids in 3rd grade. And then the 5th grade text is too hard. Maybe the 3rd grade text would actually be not too hard for the 5th graders, but it's not in the 5th grade books, down here in the 3rd grade book. So they left that behind, and now they're trying to do this one. And so he told us to look at the book and like make these like scaffolded back readings. So that's kind of where this idea came from for me. And then there's also like in our field of world language, there's another way to think about it, which is, and there's probably tons of these readings out there. And there's even a Facebook group. So you guys know Lori Clark. She's been teaching people about this for a long time. And she has a website about this as well as a Facebook group. So like it's embedded readings. And basically the concept is the same. It's like you look at the original text, even if it's like Las Aventuras de Isabella, okay? Like, or just the most basic text like that is written for language learners. You can take that and like take it back. You're basically scaffolding this reading back. So it's like you take the original text and then you like make it easier by doing things like this. Lori probably has different ways of putting these things, and maybe she's got some tips that I don't know about, so you might check that out and combine it with what I taught you. So you take the original one, and then you modify it down, and then you like modify it down again, and then sometimes I would like even modify it down one more time. And I even went so far, because I only had one class of social studies, you know, all day long, and we were all doing the same thing in all the classes, I would even go so far as like record myself reading the really easy one. And this is insane. I used to be insane. I would take an iPod, back when we had these iPods that had these little screens, like that big, and you could make a podcast on like some podcasting application on the Mac computers. And you could put pictures that would pop up at a certain place in the podcast. So I would like make these little podcasts for my kids so they could like listen to it, look at the pictures, and have the text beside them. That was for my kids who, like I had kids who couldn't read anything. Like pre-primer level, like a primer is like for primaire, you know, grado, right? So they're like pre-primer level. They can't read like Dick and Jane, like have a dog. So that is something that all teachers could do in all subject areas. And I think world language teachers, sometimes if we haven't taught like in the mainstream and we haven't taught kids in their native language, we're like, they just can't read because it's French. And then it's like, maybe they just can't read, you know, anything. There's like illiterate kids, like not illiterate, they're just like illiterate. Like they know how to read a little bit, so they're not totally illiterate. They're just like reading and writing is just not part of what I do. Okay, so I'll talk really quickly about listening, but it's actually pretty easy because it's about the same as the reading. So I was saying that you're basically giving your kids like an integrated performance assessment, which means that like the topic in the reading is going to match up with the topic in the writing. So for listening, what I would do at the very beginning of any school year and a good amount of my first year classes and even maybe my second year classes, depending on my student population, is take like an artifact that we've created in class and tell it to them again. So you guys looked at all those pictures with Justin. So like putting those pictures back up on the board. I mean, I generally don't have them in a frame. But we don't have a projector here, so we were making do. Justin and me, we were like looking at all the pictures last night. Like we knew we were gonna do this. We're like, which pictures are we gonna use? And then he woke up this morning, went to the bathroom in the P&B and was like, those are cool. It's like jazz musicians, that looks good. Because I mean, I don't know, we probably wouldn't have too much to say about that. It's a little abstract. Maybe we could guess, you know, what we see in there, but it's good to have representational art for that activity.
I could have got you one of Micah's paintings from the garage.
Oh yeah, that would have been cool. But those were cool because it was like a whole series.
That was better, yeah.
So like if we had done that in class and we'd already worked with it a couple times and we'd written about it and we'd read about it and all that stuff and we'd read the thing we wrote, then I could bring that back, just plop them up here and talk about it. So that is basically it's like the equivalent of this, right? Because I'm giving them what we wrote right back to them. I'm giving them the same thing I talked about in class right back to them. And if, let's say you are, so when I hit upon that idea of like aligning these anchor charts and these like phases and these cycles, everything was like, oh, it's so much easier. You guys gotta think about it. If I was doing special person and then picture talk about the Louvre and then, you know, tomorrow I'm doing like my trip to Quebec and then, you know, cuisine of Senegal, like it's all over the place and it's hard to like make at the end of like a week or 5 weeks. It's hard to find like a text and an artifact that line up. But if I'm doing this sort of cycle of this function or genre of describing places, then all these things are going to be about different places, and I can find some pictures about those different places that we've used in class. And then because you maybe want to do this integrated performance assessment, if you're teaching upper levels, you might go ahead and start the reading and the writing, or the speaking and the writing at the beginning of the year. But I wouldn't myself, so I'm just going to put this in like sort of a little ghost bubble. I wouldn't do this for like first and even second year classes at the beginning because I just don't want to freak the kids out. So at the beginning of my lower classes, like all I'm asking them to do is listen and read and write in English what they understood. And I would grade this with the retail rubric. And it's actually called the L1 retail rubric because I really wanted it to be clear that it was in the first language. And it's basically the same rubric. And again, I used to have this rubric that was just a general rubric, but now I've modified them and I have like description, retell, and narration, retell. And then I even went into like a little deeper and took that like sort of big rubric that like the description retell rubric is basically like what I would want kids to do after like a bunch of work with description. And I was like, well, if they're just doing the first phase where they're just describing a setting, like they're never gonna really be describing a person, and the rubric says a person. So I just aligned, then it's in the Google Classroom. I like aligned them to like the actual like sort of topics or contents or themes of those different phases. But if you're teaching upper level kids, you might have them also do speaking and listening. Or sorry, speaking and writing.
So, sorry, Tina, I have to ask, what is retell?
It's like you're listening and then you retell in your own words what you heard.
Oh, ok, répéter avec ses mots. Ok,
Yeah.
thank you.
In language arts, there's in the Common Core, there's actually around 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, there's a lot of standards in the Common Core that are about retelling. Because it's sort of like the stepping stone for kids to be able to do their own good writing. Like if you tell me a story and I can't even retell it to you with like the setting, the people, the problem, what happens, the solution, the ending. If I can't retell a story that I just heard, like I could never tell my own story because I don't know what a story contains. Or I don't have that sense of like what a narrative is. So in order to make that rubric, I actually looked at the Common Core and looked at not like high school, because this is like the beginning for our kids. So I looked at like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, which I just happened to know really well because I was like teaching language arts when we adopted the Common Core. So we did a ton of training on it. For like a lower level class, I would probably start the speaking and writing like, you know, around the end of the first quarter, you know. But at first, I would have them do more like interpretive. And actually Bill Van Patten was talking about that on his podcast one time. He was saying that like as a student goes through their career, so this is like the years, like year 1, year 2, year 3, the ratio of like interpreting to like outputting should go from like this to this. Because if they don't hear it and read it, they're never going to be able to output it. So it's like, it's not like you, oh whoops, output, sorry you guys, I'm not a math teacher. This is outputting and this is interpreting. So it's, you know, in the first year, and you can have them do some outputting, but they're not going to be able to do much. But if you give them all this input, then by the time they get up to the upper levels, they're able to do some stuff with it. Especially if they feel confident, because it's always been really easy and successful, and they've always been like, whoa, I can actually read French. That's weird, I can't read English, that's so strange. But I can read French. So, just kind of moving up. The next thing that you could do is bring them sort of like, let's say you talked about the Louvre, and so actually I shouldn't use the Louvre because like I'm thinking this is moving on in the year. So let's say you talked about the life of Marie Antoinette, okay? And you showed them like 4 pictures of Marie Antoinette. I actually made this thing for my kids. 4 pictures of Marie Antoinette when her life was wonderful, and then her life changed. Do you guys know how her life changed? Well, even before that, she got sent to jail. And honestly, like the picture of her jail cell is pretty posh. Like what I would think of a jail cell, but for her, you know, she lived at Versailles, so like, there was no gold on the ceiling, so you know it was pretty dismal. And her son got sick, and I think maybe even died in the jail. So you know it was pretty sad for her. And she was just a sweet little like princess from I think Austria, and she just never thought she deserved it, but she got beheaded and died, and her husband too, in the French Revolution. So let's imagine that you were studying Marie Antoinette, and you looked at like 4 pictures of her before her life changed and 4 pictures of her after her life changed. I made this one for that cycle, or that phase where it's like describing the present and the past. So when we would write about it, we'd be like, you know, when she was little, it was like this, and then now she's old, and it's like not so great because she's dying in the, you know, town square. Well, she died in the town square.
Yes.
Or what, the revolution.
La Place de la Revolution.
Yes! That's where she died. And they're like this with her head in this picture I have. So, and maybe it's not her head, but I tell my kids it is. So let's say you looked at those 8 pictures. 4 of her childhood and when she was like a young queen, and then 4 of when she like got, you know, arrested and everything. But you bring them another picture, okay? So you looked at these pictures in class, but you bring them 2 other pictures. So it's kind of like a related artifact. Or for another example, maybe you, every day in class, you look at the weather report from Martinique and the weather report from here. And so then you bring them the weather report from French Polynesia. Not Martinique, you know, so it's maybe slightly different places, slightly different weather, but it's something related to something that you've done a lot in class. Oh, and in this situation, you kind of have to think, well, both of these are actually, they have some similarities. So like underneath here, this is all like created by the class or the teacher. Like it's literally created by you for them. So you know them. You can like give them things you think they're going to be successful with. And then you kind of go into like this sort of like, it's an outside text, but it's like modified by you, like a kind of embedded or scaffolded thing. And then you get up here and it's more of like the, you know, the real world stuff. So the same thing goes for like the speaker. So this is like the writer, and this is like the speaker. So beginning of the year and a lot of my first year class, I'm doing the talking. Because that's more like, I'm talking about this picture of Marie Antoinette. They've never seen it before, but it's almost like just teaching class again. I'm like making sure everybody understands like what I'm saying. So they're getting a lot more scaffolding because I care about them. And I'm a sympathetic interlocutor, just like ACTFL says. So even if I'm bringing in something new, it's still me talking to them live, in person, in class. And then you can start to bring them things that are more, I guess I could say, loosely related. But still, you are, Karen, it smells like maybe,
You know,
something
it's
is
my,
getting too hot over here.
it's not.
Do you think this reindeer is going to catch on fire?
No,
Oh. No.
it's not. My daughter's doing her hair.
Oh.
She's in a parade today,
Oh, okay.
and she has to straighten it and then curl it.
Oh, yes.
I was just wondering.
Oh, that's not bad. I can make your house burn something. My hair was
It's her hair.
Just make sure in Little Women, like Jo she always gets in a lot of trouble. So she's like curling her front bangs and they come off in the curling iron and she has to like go to this party with like no hair. So, and I remember in the book, that's what I was just thinking when you told me that. It's like, the smell of burning hair filled the house, but Jo was like, whatever, she's like all distracted. Let's just hope that doesn't happen.
No.
There's a new Little Women movie coming out, do you guys know?
Oh, no.
On like Christmas Eve. Somebody told me about it, because they know I'm obsessed with Jo March. So after you've done all this, like you're talking to them, then you can start bringing them, like, so kind of the same place here where you're like starting to bring them these outside passages, you can start bringing them outside videos. And like if you used a video as the source of your reading and you use the same video as the source of your video over here, then that's more scaffolded than if you bring a different video that's about the same topic. And then in the video, there's kind of, again, like, so now you're moving into this other little phase where you're like gonna start bringing them things from like the outside world. And I mean, I'm telling you, it's not like down here I would never show them anything from the outside world. I just wouldn't use it as the basis for their assessment unless they were just like super confident, they worked with it a lot, and they're like really into it. But I'm talking here about bringing them something kind of new, right? Like maybe we studied this topic a little bit or we touched on it, but like I'm gonna see how they do with something completely unknown. So videos would be the same thing. So when I first get started with a video, it's going to be new to them because it's a new person talking. And if I made the reading and I made this, you know, bring them the video, it's going to be something more of a challenge, a new person, a new related, potentially closely related even topic. But there's ways to kind of make it easier and harder as well, just like this. Now in a video you can't go in really, I mean I guess you could skip forward, but I guess the equivalent of like cutting down and throwing things out would be like just zeroing in on like a 2-minute part of the video. That would be either easier or harder. But you can just use like the source of the video or like the intended audience of speakers of the language the same way you would over here. So at first I'm going to bring them basically like kindergarten level videos. And kindergarten level videos are just great because they're like Mr. Rogers, you know? It's like, hey, like if I was making a kindergarten level video for kids in English, I'd be like, hey kids, we're gonna learn about the solar system. Do you know what the solar system is? Well, here it is. Here's the sun. So like they are gonna be talking to those kindergarten kids in French, Spanish, German, whatever, Chinese, like you would be talking to basically your class of students who are like 16 years old in French too. So it's like you've got this native speaker who's like speaking in this scaffolded way because they're talking to like little kids in their language. Something else that you can do is bring them like teachers' videos. There's a few things that I can suggest for various languages. For Spanish, I don't know if you guys know this guy, Pablo Roman, he has a website called Dreaming Spanish, or it's a YouTube channel. So he is not actually a teacher, but he is a really avid language learner, and he went to Thailand to learn Thai, and he learned it through this method called ALG, Automatic Language Growth. And ALG has a lot in common with what we would call CI here, because it's giving them lots of CI. So he learned how to teach that way just from being interested in learning Thai. I don't know why he's so interested in learning Thai, but maybe we'll find out one day. Maybe he just happened to be there and he found a good class. I don't know. So he basically uses this method to teach, or to like communicate in Spanish. He's from Barcelona, I think. Madrid? Somewhere in Spain. He has a cute accent, because he's got that adorable Spanish accent, and he's actually a cute looking guy. And he's only like 29 or 30 years old, and he talks about skateboarding and video games, and he's a computer, like his profession is a computer programmer. And I think he sent me something the other day, no, like the other year. Time goes by quick when you get old. He sent me something about like he's trying to develop this into like a multi-country type of maybe app or something, or like a subscription that you could have, because he's like, I want to work with people in Latin America too, so that have different accents from like around the Spanish-speaking world. But he's great because he's basically teaching. So he's a native speaker, and he's like, you know, talking about new stuff. I mean, there's one that's like, que huele mal, que huele bien. Like, it's just these random things, and it'll be like in his, you know, and that one he's like sitting by his friend, he's like, oh, let's look at my trash can and find out what looks bad smelling and good smelling, and oh boy, that in there, they're like, whoa, it smells so bad, and you know, kids like that kind of thing. It's like two crazy Spaniards having a good time. There's one where he talks about like this skateboarding accident he had. Apparently, this happened to him twice. His skateboard, he was like on his skateboard on the street, and he got caught under a car, and he's like getting dragged behind the car, like down the streets of Barcelona, I guess, wherever he lives. So he just talks about all this random stuff. So this is like targeted towards language learners, but like for your kids, like most teachers around here have a like Latin American accent of some type and not a Spanish accent. Some have a Spanish accent, but even so, it's a totally different person. Plus he is from Barcelona, so unless you have an accent from Barcelona, it's kind of unique. And he is working on getting like more world accents in there, which is pretty cool. For French, there's Alice Ayel, and she has a YouTube channel too, but I don't think it has a special name. And she is using this other CI type of method called story listening. So I see a lot of actual parallels between story listening and this automatic language growth, because they're both like talking and drawing. And so she has like La Minute Française, where it's just like literally a minute, and she just talks about like a word, like an interesting word in French. She had this series one year about like Paris Christmas things you can see. Sometimes she'll tell stories, like cultural tales, and she always uses a little whiteboard. She's like drawing. She's a teacher. She teaches French. No, she teaches Spanish in Germany at an international school, but she's from France. So she's basically like teaching, but it's a new person, you know, for your kids, and like they probably haven't heard this particular story. And then, of course, as you're getting up, right, you can just move into like giving them, you know, more grade level. Like, if you look for sort of like educational films, so like, you put in like, is it educativo? Yeah, if you put in the word educational into your search, you'll find things that were made for kids. And sometimes you'll hit upon like a really great source. I haven't ever taken the time to like actually write down like the sources that I find, but like there's a French source. It's something like qu'est-ce que c'est que whatever. And there's like all these videos that are probably for like 7 and 8 years old kids in France or French-speaking kids around the world, and it's like you know qu'est-ce que c'est que le Louvre? What's the Louvre? And it's like, you know, what's a car? What's the solar system? What's the planet Earth? What's recycling? So it's made for younger kids. And just naturally, people who, like I was showing you, like you'd be like, oh, children, let's learn about the solar system. Let's recycle. Here's my box for recycling.
Tina, do you know C'est pas sorcier?
Yes, that one too. But this is not that one. It's a different one.
It's good because it's a video. It's very funny. It's a guy in a truck, and he's explaining everything from this truck. And they have it's the whole story is in a truck, and they are traveling around France. And every time they stop somewhere, and then they explain to the kid, okay, this is happening. Look, for example, le Tour de France, or whatever subject they want to
Do you
talk
think
about.
they plan it, or they're just randomly going?
No. It's planned. It's been there for. And the guy is called Jamie. We say Jamie in French, but he's Jamie. So Jamie is like a guy with a beard, and he speaks like he's a second grade teacher.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly what. That's exactly what.
C'est pas sorcier. That's mean it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal.
What is it?
It's not difficult. C'est pas sorcier.
One time I kind of figured out like what we would say in English that's almost exactly the same.
I don't know.
It's child's play.
Here we go. It's child's play now.
So sorcier is like a sorcerer.
Sorcier is the sorcerer.
Yeah, it's like it's not. You don't have to. It's not witchcraft. You know, you don't have to have magic to do this.
And you have many different subjects, and I use this a lot. It's good.
And then there's also like I was just working on finding some sources for the narration unit, and I found this suggestion, and it was like find bloggers, like 12-year-old bloggers. There are literally like 12-year-olds making millions of dollars on YouTube. And I found this adorable kid from, I think, Mexico. She's so cute. And she just like talks into the camera, and she just like talks about all the things in her room, and she's 12, right? So she's just like, but here's a little piece of advice. Like even in these upper levels that are able to kind of understand these more sort of targeted to younger people passages that are being said to them on these videos, here's some tips on how to make it easier for them. So when I'm doing an assessment with any kind of video, I kind of do this like process. So once we get into here, it's kind of the equivalent of this. So I'll make it perfect. It's like how to make it easier. And you would do some of these or all of these depending on what your level of your kids is. So the first thing that you can do is you can slow down the speed, but not to 0.5. Because it's like c'est pas sorcier, like. But if you turn it down to like 0.75, which you can on YouTube, it's like c'est pas sorcier instead of like c'est pas sorcier. So like it's gonna be, the words just aren't gonna go by as quick. Something else that, well, I don't like to put on the subtitles the first time they watch it. This is my little process. So I show them 0.75, and I'm literally only gonna show them like 2 minutes. You know, maybe 3 minutes, like maximum. So I'm gonna find the part that's like the most interesting part, or just like this, with the text, I'm gonna find the part that's like the most concrete, or that as I'm watching it, I see that they're using like a lot of scaffolding. So maybe it's like when they first jump out of the car in this sorcier thing, and they're like showing us, like, look, here it is, they're on their bicycles, and there's the road, and like, look behind me, it's like this big mountain, it's so beautiful. So if they're doing something really concrete, that's a good little segment to choose. Something else that I like to do is to play it like the second time, still at 0.75, it's going to stay at 0.75 speed. Look, when I listen to French and Spanish, at full speed, I get like 90% of it. And I like study French like it was going out of style. So I think that it's probably okay for us to show these things at 0.75 speed to our kids. So I just show it at 0.75 speed again, but like I only show like 15 seconds. And then stop. So this time they're just listening. Like, everybody put your pencils down. Time to listen. Like if it's an assessment. Second time I'm gonna play like 15 seconds and then stop it. And just tell them like this is when you're gonna be doing your retell. So whatever you just got out of that, just go ahead and write it down. It's important, I think, to show them the whole passage or the whole segment first, because otherwise they're like, they don't have the whole context to make sense of what they just heard. Plus, it's good for them to hear it again. It makes them understand more. And then, after I pause it a bunch, so you see why you don't want more than 2 minutes. Because they've already done their reading, right? And now you're doing this. This is, I mean, even though it's only 2 minutes, like if you do this and like give them time to write, it's gonna take a while. Like a 2-minute video can take like 12, 15, 16 minutes using this little process. And then the third time, I tell them they can keep their pencils up and I just play it again at 0.75 speed, so they can just kind of verify and like add anything that they didn't get the first time. And so this part can actually be modified even further down if your kids need it, and especially the first couple times that you do something like this with them, because you don't want them freaking out. Like, oh no, Spanish is so scary. You don't want to be like if this is their first time like listening to like Pablo, you don't want to be like, that guy sucks, I didn't understand a thing he said. So you want to make it successful for them. And so a way to make that even lower or like more accessible, I guess you could say, is to put on those subtitles, but in the language. So in Spanish or Chinese or French, to put on the subtitles. Because I mean, really, they're still just interpreting the language. And I understand a lot more in French and Spanish when I put on the subtitles. I learned Spanish basically by watching Destinos with the script thing in front of me. Like, listen, that thing. This is how I learned Spanish. I didn't take a class. I went to this place called Tierra, and they were doing ser en estar and how to count to 50, and I was like, I'm never gonna learn Spanish this way. Because I'd already been teaching French for like 10 years with this way of teaching, and I was like, this is not gonna cut it, like I'm not learning a thing. Seriously, like I already knew how to use ser en estar because I took Italian. And I had forgotten that they have ser en estar in Italian too, and I was like, oh yeah, duh, dude, I forgot about that little thing. Now, estuvo versus like estaba, like that was weird. I mean, I never really knew how to do that in Italian because I'm like minored in Italian, but having to learn how to navigate that was very strange. I'm probably always making mistakes still anyway because there's like 4 choices. When you talk about the past, it's just so hard. French only has 2 choices, like j'ai été and j'étais. You could say like era, estaba, estuve, and what else? Era, estaba, estuve, and fui, right? So anyway, when I listen to a language, like even as a pretty proficient teacher lady, I still benefit a lot from the subtitles. So I feel like extending that to our kids is great. And some people would say like, well, I don't know, wait a minute, because when they get up to the top, you know, when they're going to go do their AP test, they're going to hear all these passages, and they're not going to have any of this scaffolding. It's going to be like sort of like a, you know, outside world level passage that they've never heard before, and it's just related to one of these themes, and we don't even know what theme it's going to be. How is this going to get them ready? Well, again, like, you can't just be like, jump into the deep end of the pool and have a good time, because that's not going to make them stronger. And if anybody does get stronger, it's going to be the kids who have a really high English vocabulary, and probably not so much for Chinese, because there's not a lot of cognates. But between English and the Romance languages, maybe you guys know this. I learned this in graduate school, and it blew my mind. So we were talking yesterday about how English has like 2 words for everything, at least, and like French and Spanish have like maybe, sometimes it's the opposite, like estuvo and estuve, or en fue and all that. But usually we have more. And the reason is because we had a Germanic language, like Anglo-Saxon, in England, or England, I guess. Anyway, in merry old England, they had Anglo-Saxon, and then they were just living their lives, and they had all these normal words like, well, actually, table is not the same, but like house, hand, head, mom, mother, father, all those are German. It's like Mutter, Vater, house, Hand, okay? Oh, I think it's Kopf, but so different word. I don't know where head comes from, because the head isn't in Spanish or French either. I wonder where the word head comes from. Because it's Kopf, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I know that because I saw Stephen Krashen saying, Das ist mein Hand, das ist mein Kopf. So it stuck, because it was comprehensible input and I understood it. So they had all these like regular words, like, and cow, and pig, and sheep. So my teacher used like the word sheep and mutton to explain this to us. Because mouton is sheep in French.
Mhm.
And mutton in English is the sheep we eat. And we have also the word for sheep. But in French, a mouton is like walking around. And then I think it's also what you eat. Do you say like eating mouton?
Oui, on mange le mouton, oui.
But we have like mutton. You wouldn't say like, oh, look at that cute little mutton over there. The people will be thinking you're looking at a plate of food. That cute little dish of mutton, lamb stew. So the reason that we have these two, okay, I'm gonna like channel Dr. Coco, my Italian teacher. She goes, okay, imagine this. You're in England back in the day before 1066 when the French invaded, or the Normans. And you're just living your life, and you're like, oh, yum, give me a sheep, I'm hungry. And then these like rich people come over, and they take over, and they're like, mouton, sur la table. And you're like, oh, that's table, and that's mouton, but that's for the fancy people. So like, I guess when you're eating it on a fancy table, it's mouton. So mutton is where that came from. And then like sheep, it's like, well, I mean, I'm just gonna go back over here and try to like, get some meat off of my sheep over here so that I can eat it. So all of this language that came in from like the Roman Romance family, it all came into this like echelon of, like echelon is also a French word, like échelle, ladder. So it's like up here in this echelon of like the ruling class and the all these new ideas that came over to them, because France brought over a lot of like government structure that had never been part of their existence before. And so like all of these things like liberty and just a lot of words, government. I mean, so a lot of the Romance language, Chinese isn't the same, but the Romance languages have this huge amount of cognates, but they're in this academic and like professional and government register. And a lot of our kids don't have those words in English. So we're like, well, yeah, dude, liberty, liberté, liberté. And they're like, they don't know the word liberty. And we kind of take it for granted that they would know the word liberty, but they probably know the word freedom. Because freedom is Freiheit in German. So like all of those words are just like kind of what, like for an English speaker, that's like our sort of home language almost. And then we've got all this like, academic language. Because honestly, if somebody asked me like, what is it when you don't have somebody bossing you around and you feel free? I'd be like, that's freedom. I wouldn't be like, that's liberty. That's not what comes to mind first as a native English speaker, because that's, liberty is very like fancy. Yeah, so I think a lot of Romance teachers in particular can take it for granted and think that like all these cognates, they're just all cognates, but they're not cognates for our kids if they don't know the word in English. Like, I mean, photosynthesis is the same word in all these different languages, but they might not know the word photosynthesis. Chlorophyll is the same in all the languages, but they don't know that word in English. They're not going to know it when we say hypothesis. It's the same, right? But these are all very like hard words and concepts for a lot of our students. So anyways, there you go.
Technology is kind of like something where I notice my students from other countries they pick up quickly, when you use the new technological words.
Oh yeah. Well, I think a lot of the technology words are actually just the same now. Like,
Right.
well, I mean, some of them are different, but like, DVD is like DVD, right? But we don't use those anymore.
My book does.
There was a time at one point where I was like, whoa, they put DVD in the book. They put DVD in the book. That's great. And now I'm like, DVD. Oh my gosh, like video disc.
I have to teach this kid a diskette. And then,
Oh.
yeah, and like, oh my god, guys, humorous. Don't even worry about that. I was like, what the heck is that?
I know.
They need to know.
We
English with a Romance language. My language, Korean, Japanese, we got the influence from Chinese, and plus.
Oh, is it the same in Japanese and Korean? Like,
Oh,
there's
Japanese
this
is
high level of Chinese, like, academic words.
Sure. As well as